Welcome back to everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. And I was just saying thank you to Christina and to CJ, who I can now see because he can now hear me. Thank you so much for that fantastic input, building on what Rachel and Paul were saying earlier as we looked at some of the kind of big meta understanding around all of this, but then the two of you helping us to drill this down into what really matters, the lives of children and the lives of young people. And your stories are just so moving. So there've been lots of questions for you. And the first one is this: is there a correct line, a correct way of speaking, a correct line to take when talking to a young person and around these gender issues? This was sent by a teacher in a school. So young person presents to you, they find the courage to speak to you. You're terrified because this has never happened before and you've not been trained at all. What do you do?
Okay. First of all, Steve, teacher needs to take a breath, of course. But I think the most important thing is for them to say to the young person, I'm listening to you, and be led by what that young person says. That is the most important thing, to listen to what they're saying. So not like what happened to CJ and say, go away and pretend you're a lesbian for the next however many years, to go, I'm listening to you. What do you want? What can we do for you? And I think that's the line I would use for teachers, not to be afraid, just go, what can I do for you? And take it from there.
CJ, what happens when a school finds itself in a position where a young person comes forward, a student comes forward, and they tell you about what they feel about themselves, who they are, but the parents are fundamentally opposed to this, and the school therefore finds itself in an impossible position caught between parents and student?
So I've never experienced that myself, but I would say that at the forefront of everything is the child, and the child should be supported. I know a lot of parents won't support their child, but I personally believe that the school should do everything that they can do to be able to support that child. Whether that be to ask their preferred pronouns and name whilst they're in school and use that to make the child feel comfortable, or whether that be working with the parents to help them understand their child a bit more. And a lot of work between school and parents should go on then.
Yeah. Christina, add into that from your experience, what would you say?
So what we do not just as a parent, that's someone who works for Mermaids, what we do say to schools is that you have to take into account it's called Fraser guidelines or Gillett competence. If a young person is able to voice exactly what they want and they know what they're voicing. So it's about understanding that and taking that on board. Does that young person exactly know what they're talking about? And that's going to be looking at age. If you've got a 6 or 7 year old coming to you and then you've got an older one, it's slightly different. But also, schools can't go and break that confidence to parents without asking the young person first, because what if they tell a parent and that parent then, we've had children taken out of the country because schools told parents without the young people knowing. So it's that you're walking that very fine line about, do we tell a parent and actually the parents didn't know and then something happens? Or do we just support the young person, like CJ says, in school, using the pronouns where they're affirmed in school, and then when they're at home, they're not affirmed? You know, it's that fine guidelines, Steve.
CJ, recently, of course, we've all followed the news about the Tavistock Clinic and the court case that led to them feeling that they had to suspend giving puberty blockers to under 16-year-olds, and then the appeal against that being overturned in these just last couple of weeks, I think. I hear from people all the time who will say to me, you know, the problem is that, for instance, a young woman who doesn't feel attractive, who feels that she's not slim enough or tall enough, or she's too spotty or whatever, a way out of her problems because of the pressure created through social media and society generally, the sexualization of our society, a way out of this is to opt out and say, well, actually, I'm not feminine. I'm not a girl. I'm a boy. And it's an escape route. I hear that said to me all the time. I get challenged about that all the time. What's your response to that kind of thinking?
I personally think that, without being too rude, that it's a bunch of rubbish. Because personally, I don't see why anyone would willingly put themselves down this life of doctor's appointments, surgeries, medication, and all of that. Because personally, I wouldn't choose this if I had the choice. And if I did have the choice, I would have been a cis woman, because that's how I was born. And that's, for me, what would have been, it would have been an easier life. It would have been a quieter life. It would have been less stressful. I wouldn't have been as depressed as a teenager. So I don't believe that being trans is a cop-out. I think it's, you either know that you are or you're not. And there's no way to describe how you know. It's just, you know.
Thank you, CJ. And Christina, picking up on that and some of the questions being asked this morning as well. Just, I think the week before last, I was talking to a journalist about this conference, and she said to me, "But you've got mermaids." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "But they're so militant, and they want to drive everyone without thought into transition. Where are the brakes on this?" How would you respond to that? Because that's the message that's out there a lot of the time, isn't it?
It is. And Steve, if anyone phoned the helpline and they were chatting to us or used our web chat, they'd see that's not the case, because we always say things like, there's no guaranteeing this is the journey, but at the moment, this is what your child's feeling. So we're going to talk to you about that. But that could actually change. We don't know. So we always say that. We've never pushed anyone into it. We support parents where children might have said it and then actually decide they're not. Do you know what I mean? They don't go on that journey. So we're not militant about it. I think it's just that we are the voice that's out there for young people, Steve. So we are that voice that is heard all the time. And so people see us as being militant, but we're not, and we're definitely not. If you phoned tomorrow and started talking to one of us, you'd find that we'd be going, but these are the options. Let us send this out for you. Have a look at this, see what you think. And it's about support, not pushing people into anything. And it's just about ensuring that parents and young people are supported. But as I say, I think it's, we are that voice, Steve. And that's why we get that we are militant, but we're not, really not. So.
You'll be pleased to hear, Christina, that's exactly what I said.
Yeah,
it takes
brilliant.
courage, doesn't it, to raise a conversation that so many people want to avoid. And so just in this last couple of minutes, CJ, I'd like to ask you about that, because what came through to me as you were speaking is just your enormous courage. Where does that come from? And tell us about your journey to find that.
I don't know. I've never really seen myself as having courage. I've just stood up and been who I am. And at the end of the day, I said to my mum at one point, it was either I was an alive man or a dead woman. And that's as straightforward as it was. So I suppose there is some sort of courage there in the fact that I was able to say who I was. But for me, transitioning was a matter of life or death, and it wasn't there was no courage behind that for me. It was I wanted to be alive and I wanted to live my life. I just couldn't do it as who I was. So I suppose the courage comes in the fact that you want to live and you know who you are, but there's no real like, for me there was no real driving force. It was just, I know that this is who I am. I know that this is where I want my life to go. I just can't do it as I am now, and I needed to change. And I think with a lot of trans people, that is what it is. None of us feel courageous or like we're brave or anything like that. We've just stood up and been who we are because we've spent so much of our lives telling a lie and living a lie that we now just need to be ourselves so that we can actually live and not hide away from the world anymore.
CJ, thank you. You should know actually that even your ability to articulate that for us breathes courage into us and helps us. Christina and CJ, thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Carrie.